Hey everyone, it's Adrian from Ping Pirates TCG, and we're back with another video. So I hope you guys had a great weekend dealing with the new release cards, pulling those manga aces, pulling those SRs that you need. Personally, for me, I pulled great in my boxes. It's been awesome. But today's video, we're going to be talking about that new Whitebeard archetype. And I'm going to be specifically talking about the Moby Dick version because that's where all of the new cards kind of lie. There is a Strawbeard version that you can look at if you're interested in that. But today's video, I'm just going to be talking about the whole new archetype and kind of like the way to play the Moby Dick version. And this video is kind of special to me because this is actually going to be the deck I'm running in the online regionals next weekend. So make sure to wish me luck, guys. I really want that finalist playmat. But with that being said, let's get right into what the Whitebeard leader card does. And this leader is just super unique because of his two traits. One, he's a 6k leader, which is something we've never seen before. He's actually going to take like a Dawn commitment or like some sort of effect to swing over him. And then also, he's at 6 life, which is greater than any other leader, right, that we have. We have 4, 5, and now 6. But the caveat to these things are, at the end of your turn, you are going to add 1 card from the top of your life area to your hand. And that seems like a bad effect, but honestly, I mean, it is 100%. Like, if he was just like a 6k power, 6 life leader, he'd be absolutely busted, and maybe even like a little bit better. But adding 1 card from the top of your life area actually isn't too bad because it's like you're drawing 2 cards from your deck, right? Because you're drawing 1 from life and 1 from your deck. So you end up having this huge hand. And at 6 life, you actually have more cards to draw from than any other leader will have, right? And there's also a few cards that actually just synergize with being at low life, similar to Radical Beam, where like you are at 2 or 1 life and they gain an extra effect. These effects are absolutely broken, honestly. We'll get into all of them later, but before that, let's get into some general strengths about the deck. So the most obvious strength about this deck is that it's at 6,000 power, right? It's a 6,000 power leader, and this changes everything about the game. It's changing the way your opponent swings. It's changing their upcoming turns because they can't swing at you. It just changes so much about the game. It changes the math for everything, for instance. So being at 6,000 power means that you're going to be swinging harder earlier. Like I said, like you attach 1 Dawn, you're at 7k, you swing, your opponent's probably not going to block that, right? And then also, like, they can't just swing 5 at you and grab cards out of your hand. They have to like attach Dawn, and sometimes that really screws them over. Like I was playing against a kid in locals, and then it's just like a lot of their turns are like on curve. So if you want to play an Okiku on 3, you're not going to be able to swing into my face anymore because you're at 5k to my 6k. So it's just things like that, like they start stacking up like later on in the game, and it just makes it so difficult for some decks to deal with that 6k life or that 6k power. And that's just what makes this deck super strong. Because of the nature of this deck, it also has just incredible offensive and defensive options. You're running the vanillas because they're huge stat sticks that could be boosted with Moby Dick, and they just go up to crazy numbers. You're swinging for like easily 9k for each one of your attackers. And then also you just have some of the best defensive options in the game in the form of like Radical Beam, Guard Point, Marco. These are cards like Guard Point usually isn't played because it just nets you that 3k, but it's so good in Whitebeard because it's blocking a 9k swing at you, or it's blocking, sorry, an 8k swing at you, and it's just so disgusting to do that for 1 Dawn. And with Moby Dick, like, you're going to be swinging so much for such high numbers, you could easily kill people from like 3 or even 4 life if you have the right board setup, plus like a rush character or something. It is absolutely insane, the offensive potential of this deck. Also in the game now, you have things like Seaquake and Vista that can help you with your aggro matchups. You're going to be KOing like these wimpy characters. You have things like Squard that can subtract up to 4,000 from your opponent's power. So you could potentially knock like a 7k power thing with Squard plus Vista or Squard plus Seaquake. It is absolutely insane. Even things like Ace where he minus 3ks 2 characters is absolutely insane. And then on top of all of this, this deck is actually like surprisingly tricky. I mean, the plays are linear, but like in terms of math, you know, your opponent has so much room where they could just mess up, right? Because you're at 6k, you're going to have a gigantic hand, like a ton of options to how you want to counter out, or if you even want to counter out in some cases, like, and there's just a lot of misplays that can happen because of the nature of this deck, where you have like a 10 card hand and then like you're at 6k, so the math is all wrong. It can be very, very difficult to navigate through for the other player. This deck is crazy strong and it's nothing to scoff at, but honestly, let's get into some weaknesses about the deck. So some weaknesses is that you are going to be playing at 0 life for like almost half the game, to be honest. Like today in my locals tournaments, like I was at 0 life for like 3 or 4 turns in a row, and that's very nerve-wracking to deal with, especially if you're going into like a serious tournament. Like that might be more stress than it's worth, right? But also that means less mistakes. Like you cannot make a lot of mistakes at 0 life, because you mess up one math thing, you overcommit one counter, you are just going to die. And that might be hard to deal with for some people. So honestly, like this deck is not for the faint of heart. You are going to be at 0 life every single game you play. I have never won a game where I'm at like 1 or 2 life left. The next weakness is more of just a Moby Dick problem. Because in the Strawbeard version, you could run things like Nami to make your deck more consistent, but the Moby Dick version can be a little bit inconsistent because they don't have a searcher yet. So you can run like the 1 cost event, but honestly, I don't think it's worth it. They don't get a searcher, or Whitebeard doesn't get a searcher until EZO in OP3. So you're kind of at the mercy of your own draws. But honestly, it's not that big of a weakness because you're going to be drawing a lot, and like you're going to be seeing a lot of your like 4 of cards. Like the deck is pretty overall like consistent, I'd say. But you know, there are times where you'll just draw a hand, it'll be like completely unplayable, and you can't really do a lot because you don't have like the searches that you need. Another weakness about this deck is that it's just very linear. Like there's no real it's not like playing against like Ivankov or Law, where you don't really, like, it's kind of hard to tell how their turn is going to map out. The Whitebeard turns, like, they're very kind of easy to predict. So if they're easy to predict, they're also easy to play around, right? And which is not the best for a deck where like you're going to be at 0 life for 3 or 4 turns. Because if your opponent is able to kind of predict what you're going to play and map their turns around it, you are just going to spend the game like trying to play catch up all game, and then you're going to end up using up all your cards before they swing at you for game. And then also, with that being said, like running out of gas is a straight up lose condition for you, like even more so than Zoro, because I feel like with Zoro you could kind of still replenish your hand when your opponent starts to take life. You still have a chance. With Whitebeard, you do not have a chance because you are grabbing all of your life cards. So you pretty much have like almost a finite amount of cards that you are going to see within your deck. And you cannot you can't search them. You can't go plus like you can in green, like draw with the Rhizos and the Bonnie, and then you could potentially get even more cards with Bonnie. There's nothing like that in Whitebeard. So you have the cards that you're going to draw within the turn, and also the cards that you're going to draw with life. And those are the cards that you have to win with. If you end up gassing out and using up like your resources, you're just going to lose on the crackback in late game because you're going to be guaranteed at 0 life. So let's get right into some of the new cards that you're going to see within this deck, starting off with the stage. It's a 2-cost stage, and there's no resting. It's just on your turn. If you have 1 or less life cards, your Edward Newgate leader and all your characters with Whitebeard Pirates in its type gain plus 2,000 power. On top of that, like little cherry on the top, it has a trigger, play this card. So if you end up taking an early game hit, you could just play this if you draw it from your life, and it's free. It's awesome. It's probably not going to leave the field because black doesn't run the Yasakani Sacred Jewel trigger. So it's just going to be staying on the field. And this effect is absolutely busted because your guys are already like big as it is. This stage turns Whitebeard leader swing into an 8k swing. Attach 1 Dawn, that's 9k. That's taking at least 3 cards out of your opponent's hand, and that's just with the leader swing, right? If you have stuff like Ace, King Do on the board, that's another 9k swing. If you have something like Squard on the field, that's a 7k swing for no Dawn. Vista turns it into a 5. Like, you guys pretty much get it. Like, this is one of the best endgame finishers in the game right now. It just makes the math so simple in some games. Like, this is just a win condition. Also, this is the card that's going to just let you run over people that are at like 3 life or even 4 life sometimes. I've been able to take. So this is an incredibly important card. You're going to want to mulligan for it in most matchups. I would say in aggressive matchups like red, Moby Dick is still very important, but like what's more important is your Vistas, your Seaquakes. This is a really good card into things like black because, or like the slower decks, because, you know, they're going to take a little bit more time chipping at your life. So what you can do is just like fully mull and then play for the Moby Dick turn, like in the late game. And then also, you know, they're just vanillas, but I wanted to talk about the bread and butter of the deck, Atmos and King Do. I think these are just like 4-ofs in any Whitebeard version of the deck, because, you know, Atmos is going to become an 8k, King Do is going to become a 9k swing. It's absolutely insane. And then also, like, things like King Do are probably going to stick onto the board most of the time, because if they're swinging into your 7k King Do, that means they're not swinging into your leader, which is awesome. Also, like, countering out of like a 7k swing is a lot easier to do than a 6k one. And these are just like such great finishers because they're going to stick on the board. And if your opponent commits any sort of like resources to getting rid of them, that's resources that they can't use on your other higher priority cards or your leader itself. On top of these big vanillas, we have also rush cards that can help us close out the game, like Ace. Ace just says on play, give 2 of your opponent's characters minus 3,000 power for this turn, which is awesome for removing things like 8-cost Kid or like an Odin that they left up. Pretty much anything that's big. This is also really good if you have like things like Seaquake in your hand, something just cheap to play, so you could just immediately remove things like blockers. And then also, if your leader has Whitebeard Pirates in its type, then you gain rush. So he's also going to swing for a 7k or a 9k depending on whether your Moby Dick is active and online, but he's just going to be a great card that just shapes the tempo of your game, honestly. And also in terms of rush, we have Jozu. He is a 4-cost 4k rush character only if he has a Dawn under him and only if you have 2 or less life and your leader has Whitebeard Pirates in its type. Does he gain rush. But he's also a 2,000 power, which makes him an awesome defensive option as well. He's honestly probably the last thing I counter out with, because he takes a lot of games, especially if you have Moby Dick up. You are basically paying 5 Dawn for a 7k swing. It's very similar to like playing 3 Dawn for Zoro and then, you know, like attaching 2 Dawn onto him. But yeah, Jozu has just won me like so many games, honestly, because your opponent isn't expecting it, so they might actually just like overcommit a lot of their resources to countering out other things and then not realize that you have the Jozu in hand to just swing for game. So we looked at some of the big offensive options of this deck, so let's go ahead and look at the defensive options. These are all things that you've probably seen before, since all of them are from OP1 except for the new Marco card. And he's an absolutely broken card, honestly. He's a 4-cost 5k blocker with 1k counter, but you're probably never going to use him as a counter, honestly, unless you're like going for game. And his effect is on KO, you could trash 1 card from your hand that has Whitebeard Pirates in its type. And if you have 2 or less life, he's going to resummon himself once he's KO'd. He resummons himself rested, but you may notice that this effect isn't once per turn. So he's just going to keep resummoning himself if you have the cards to do that. And he's really annoying because he's one of the most sticky blockers in the game. The only way you're dealing with him cleanly is like by bouncing him back to your hand, right? And then on top of that, because he's so sticky, he's probably going to be on your board for on your turn for like a swing. And with Moby Dick up, he turns into a 7k attacker, which is honestly amazing. And then also we're running the Tony Chopper. There are Vistas running rampant. There's, you know, like Whitebeard, 9 costs running rampant, but I still think the Tony choppers are a good pick because, you know, if they don't have the answer to it, you could just block out of something in the early game so that you could kind of preserve your life for later. And then also in the late game, he could really come in clutch because your opponent has probably played a bunch of cards to try and keep up with your tempo, so they might not actually have the answer to like a chopper. And then of course we're running the 2 1 cost counter events. You mostly want to run the 1 cost counter events because you want to be very dawn efficient within your turns. You have to like effectively use them because, you know, you don't want to be wasting your dawn. You want to be attaching it and swinging so that like life can stick, and then you'll have an easier time finishing out the game. So we run the 1 cost events. We're running guard point, which is going to just boost our leader up to 3,000. Radical beam is of course like a 2k counter unless you're at 2 or less life, which is going to be very common for us. Then it turns into a 4k counter. So that's kind of why we run them. The math on them is absolutely insane, and like if you have multiple copies in your hand, like you're honestly going to be sitting pretty at 0 life for a long time. So in terms of defense, we also have removal cards. We have the new Vista card, which is a 3 cost 3k with 1k counter, and his effect is on play KO up to one of your opponent's characters with 3,000 power or less. And that exact same card text is pretty much on Seaquake as well, where in your main phase, if your leader has a Whitebeard Pirates in its type, you're going to KO up to one of your opponent's characters with 3,000 power or less. And these two are really good because, you know, they're going to be knocking out cheap blockers, wimpy characters that are going to be swinging at you against Zoro. But honestly, they are the best when paired with cards like Otama and Squad. Otama, you know, is just going to minus 2k something. You can knock out something like an Okiku. And Squad is going to do the same thing, except his is on play, give up to one of your opponent's characters minus 4,000 power during the turn. And then you're going to add the top card from your life area to your hand. And Squad is great because he's awesome for removing threats off the board that are like 7 and below, like 7 cost Kid. I have played Squad into Seaquake and gotten rid of a 7 cost Kid with 4 Dawn, which is more efficient than like Jet Pistol would or Jet Pistol Otama would. And also on top of that, that life clause isn't like a cost that you pay. It's something that happens after the minus 4,000. So if you can't take the life because you're at 0 life, you get this effect for free, which is absolutely insane in the late game. And then also if you have Moby Dick up, you are going to be swinging for 7k with the Squad, with his 5k. So he's just an amazing card, honestly, super slept on. I thought he wasn't that good of a card until I started testing, and he's just great for like subtracting 8 cost kids and, you know, popping Basil Hawkins, 7 cost kids. He's just an all-around great card. So this is what a potential deck list, you know, just putting it all together would look like. This is actually the exact list that I run at locals and that I'm probably going to run in the online regionals. I've already won 1 tournament with this deck, so I can attest it definitely works into the meta, and it's so fun, honestly. Like, I recommend everyone to play it, and it's super cheap. Like, if you are a budget player, this deck is honestly so cheap to build because everything is a rare except, or like a rare and below, except for the aces, and the aces are only like $5 to $7. So if you are looking to get into the game, this is probably one of the best decks to do it. It's a top meta contender for, you know, commons and uncommon cards. But with that being said, that's going to be the end of this video today, guys. And as always, thank you for watching. Make sure to like, comment, and subscribe. Tell me about how your box pulls have been going. Tell me about if you're going to online regionals, and if I'll see some of you, I don't know, like there, I guess, at Carta Magica. So that's going to be great. And as always, like, I hope you guys are doing well with your school, your work, anything. And I will see you guys on the next one.